The Nikon Z8 is going to be released on May the 10th at 8 a.m. in the morning. But what about the Nikon Z6 Mark III, the Nikon Z7 Mark III, and the variable aperture 200 to 600 millimeter? Well, I've got the details coming up after this short break. But first, please do me a favor. Follow me on Twitter. But most importantly, please subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, but it really does help this channel grow. All eyes are on May the 10th, 2023 at 8 a.m. for the Nikon scheduled event. It's hardly any surprise that from the leaks, well, we're getting the Nikon Z8 announced along with a lens and some accessories. Don't trust the rumors? Well, have a look right here, right down here. Do you see that? Look at how the question mark turns into an 8. That's got to be the biggest Easter egg Nikon's ever given. If you're a subscriber to this channel, this isn't news to you, and you're probably already aware that I'm having a live stream 1 hour before the Nikon scheduled event where we're going to talk about the Nikon Z8 with my panel of guests. We're going to ask ourselves, what would we do if we were the president of Nikon? How would we position this camera? What sort of specifications would it have? And we're going to talk about the latest news and rumors. And then once Nikon goes live with the announcement, we'll cover it live. And then right after the event, we're going to do our post-game analysis. But what about the successor to the Nikon Z6 Mark II, the Nikon Z7 Mark II? They were released back in 2020, and rumors of the Nikon Z6 Mark III, the Z7 Mark III, have been rumored for as long as the Nikon Z8. But I wouldn't expect a refresh of the Nikon Z6 Mark III or the Z7 Mark III until the fall, because May the 10th is all going to be about the Nikon Z8, some lenses and accessories. And once we have that announcement, then we can start to see some rumors coming through. But up until the Z8 has its day, until it starts shipping, I wouldn't really expect any sort of leaked specifications on the Z6 Mark III and the Z7 Mark III. And the Z7 is an interesting camera. It has a resolution of 45.7 megapixels, the same as the Nikon Z9, and the same as what we expect to see in the Nikon Z8. And a few years ago, that camera stood out with its high resolution, but today, it doesn't. I think it makes sense that the Nikon Z7 Mark III is still going to be a high-resolution king, but it's going to have to do something to, well, take that title back. I really think that Nikon needs to make the Z7 Mark III compete directly against the Sony A7R5, changing its trajectory, having north of 60 megapixels, and focus on delivering high-resolution images. And if Nikon gives us a CF Express Type B card, it can do so at a higher shooting rate than the Sony A7R5. And this might seem like a bit of a stretch. That's not exactly what the Nikon Z7 Mark II is designed for. But at the same point, if you look at this camera, you can see it morphing into Nikon's high-resolution king. And up until about 2-3 years ago, it was Nikon's high-resolution king. And for the Nikon Z7 to be a true high-resolution king for Nikon, there's one thing that they have to do. It's an absolute necessity, and that's give it a CF Express Type B card slot. You see, that's key. Now the Sony, they have a CF Express Type A card slot, and it has one single PCIe lane. Type B cards, they have two. And what that allows Nikon to do is to go north of the 10 frames per second at 61 megapixels that the Sony A7R5 does. Will Nikon be bold enough to do this? I certainly hope so. Now they are going to have to raise the price a little bit, but if they are aiming at this camera being a high-resolution king, I think it makes an awful lot of sense. Because right now, the Z7 Mark II, with the Nikon Z8 coming out with all the rumored specifications, I think the Z7 is a little bit confused, and based on the recent price decrease that we're seeing on this camera, I think that's reflecting on that. I don't know if Nikon doesn't give it something like 60 megapixels, a CF Express Type B card slot, I'm at a loss as to where this camera fits in, and maybe you can help me out. Maybe I'm completely oblivious to how this camera can survive at 45.7 megapixels with the Nikon Z8 at 45.7 megapixels, 20 frames per second. The Nikon Z9 also at 20 frames per second, and of course 8K 60. You see, to me, if it doesn't do this, the camera to me is, well, I don't understand it. But then again, this is just conjecture. But the Nikon Z8 delivering 8.3K 60 frames per second video, 20 frames per second lossless RAW at 1.2 gigabytes per second at 45.7 megapixels, the Nikon Z7 to be noticed has to step out of this on its own and be focused on being a high-resolution king. Otherwise, it's just going to become a shadow of the Nikon Z8. But what about the Nikon Z6 Mark III? What should it be like? Well, let's cue the Canon EOS R8. The Canon EOS R8 was just announced a few years ago, yet it's $200 less than the Nikon Z6 Mark III at $300 off. And the Nikon Z6 only offers 4K up to 30 frames per second. The Canon EOS R8, 4K 60. The R8 delivers 40 frames per second, while the Nikon Z6 only 14 frames per second. Although the Z6 does have dual card slots. But if Nikon wants to keep the price premium over the Canon EOS R8, they need to stick with dual memory cards, but give it a 30 megapixel sensor and improve the autofocus system. Do that, and they'll have a winner and they can stop discounting their cameras. Nikon Rumors says that we're likely to get the 200 to 600 millimeter late this spring, but they're saying that the focal range will instead be 180 to 200 millimeters and have a variable aperture. I know many of you were hoping to see the 200 to 600 millimeter, or now the 180 to 600 millimeter, announced on May the 10th alongside the Nikon Z8. And I still think that's plausible. What Nikon Rumors is saying is that this lens, the 180 to 600 millimeter, or the 200 to 600 millimeter variable aperture, is going to be available in late spring. I think it's highly plausible that we get the Nikon Z8 announced, as well as a lens, the 200 to 600 millimeter, or 180 to 600 millimeter, announced on May the 10th, but they won't start shipping until the end of the month or early June. That makes an awful lot of sense. But we'll just have to wait and see if that is actually the case. And the price of the Nikon Z8, we still don't have that information yet. We don't have a proposed price for the Nikon Z6 Mark III or the Nikon Z7 Mark III. And pricing information and availability for those two cameras, we're not going to know that information until we start getting some leaked specifications because, well, pricing is based on where it's positioned, who it's aimed at. Will the Nikon Z7 be the new resolution king or not? And if you want to stay up to date on all the latest news and rumors regarding the Nikon Z8 pricing, other leaked specifications, the Nikon Z6 Mark III, the Nikon Z7 Mark III, or the 180/200 to 600 millimeter variable aperture lens, well then go ahead and subscribe, but make sure you choose all notifications. And for all those minor stories that aren't quite big enough to have their own separate video, follow me on Twitter because I put a lot of other information out there, stuff that isn't quite big enough to have its own video, such as pricing information, like $400 off the Nikon Z7 Mark II and $300 off the Nikon Z6 Mark II at B&H and Adorama. But there's one other thing I want to talk to you about, and that's my smart links for the Nikon Z8. Notice how I've got pre-order links here? How could I have pre-order links when Nikon hasn't announced the camera? Well, these are what I call smart pre-order links. So if you were to copy these down or bookmark this page or bookmark these links, and as soon as we get that announcement on May the 10th, you just keep pressing refresh, whether it's F5 or Command R on the Mac, and then you're going to save yourself a few seconds so you can get early into that queue. And here's my recommendation. Now, if you're already gung-ho and you know you're going to get the Nikon Z8 regardless of what the specifications are, yeah, you know what to do. But if you're kind of on the fence and you're kind of thinking, well, I want to see the reviews, I want to see what's going on with this camera, my recommendation is go ahead, get into the queue early, pre-order it, watch the review videos. You can always cancel later if you want to, but if you take a few days, 2 days to look at the reviews and to think this through, then what's going to happen is you're going to be so far down the queue, you might end up waiting 6 months. We saw this with the R5 and other very popular cameras like the Nikon Z9. We've had to wait 6 months. Some people have had to wait a year. And usually what happens is if the pre-order date is on May the 10th and they don't start shipping until the end of May, well, you've got at least a few weeks to cancel your pre-order. And of course, depending on where you purchase it from, even if it does get to ship to your door, you can send it back. I don't recommend doing that. What I do recommend, though, is pre-ordering right away, and then that way you can always cancel later, and that way you're guaranteed you're going to get it early instead of waiting a long time. So these pre-order links will help save you a few seconds to get you early on in the queue. But just a note, though, I do get a small commission back, around 2%, for the sale of these if you buy it through my links. And that goes back into helping this channel grow. It really does make a huge difference. And for all of you that have used my pre-order links for B&H and Adorama or Amazon, I really do appreciate it. But I also recommend reaching out to your local camera store as well. We don't want to forget the local camera stores. They're businesses in our small towns, and they really appreciate your business. And I can guarantee you they'll be more than happy to set up some pre-order system with you. Even if they don't have something online, just reach out to them and let them know. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate you watching my channel. It's been 3.5 years since I started this channel, and I'm really starting to feel comfortable in my skin in front of a camera. And when I'm talking through the lens to the camera, I don't see myself as talking through the lens. I'm picturing you, John, or I'm picturing you, Sean, or Steve, Kathy. I'm looking right through the lens and I'm imagining you there instead of this big eye, because Whenever you shoot with a lens like the Canon RF 50mm f1.2, it's a big eye, and even that aperture is wide open, because I think I'm shooting at f2 or f2.8 down here, and it's you know what it's like? It's like talking to Hal. Yeah, Hal from 2001 Space Odyssey. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have yourself a great weekend. I know it's a great weekend for ducks, but maybe it's a good time to get out there and support local businesses in your mall. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again soon. All right, guys, I want to tell you about a massive screw-up I had this morning. As you can see, that sometimes I have to wear glasses, and this is no longer an option for reading. So, for example, when I queue up, get everything ready, turn the lights on, turn the camera on, put all these little accent lights around, I set up my Tascam, because that's what I use, a lavalier wired mic, and every time before I start shooting, I make sure I I format the SD card in here. I format the AtomX Angelbird SSD on the Atomos. But this time around, I don't think I had my glasses on, and instead of going to format right away, I accidentally went into mic bias, and I toggled it from, what was it, off to on or on to off. Now, I didn't realize I'd done this, and I went back into format, and I recorded this video previously this morning, and when I went up to edit, there was no audio. None. I was angry. I was frustrated. I was peeved, to say the least. And those aren't the words I use. Trust me. I keep this channel G-rated, but I'm not a G-rated person. I'm old. I get frustrated when you've wasted all that time, because my plan was for Saturday, that's when I'm recording this video, is to get it done early before breakfast, and then I can enjoy the rest of the day with my family. It was so frustrating. I turned it off. I took the thing apart. I wanted to make sure there wasn't a loose connection, because sometimes this connector does come loose, and that can be a reason for it not to record. Nothing. And then I remembered, wait a minute, you didn't go directly into format. So I went to check mic bias. I have multiple Tascams, and I wanted to check against my baseline. I thought, this doesn't look right in mic bias, and sure enough, I toggled it back, and you can hear me. It's working. I haven't made a screw up like this in a long time, but I told my wife, and I said, I'm an idiot. This is what I did. I recorded without audio. And she said, you're not an idiot. Everybody makes mistakes. And then she paused and said, you're awesome. So yeah, but now I have the house to myself, because she's gone off to the mall with my son to get him some shoes, and I'm here to edit this video. So I'm going to relax and cue something on the television. I'm going to take my time, maybe have a nice cup of coffee. I think I deserve a nice cup of coffee, but I just wanted to share with you a little bit of behind the scenes of how sometimes, even though everything might seem well-oiled and well-organized, and I might seem like a professional to you, I'm an ordinary filmmaker. I screw up and I make mistakes, and all I have to do is go back and look at my first few videos. And please, if you haven't seen my first few videos, speaking me not, I can't, go back and take a look at my first few videos and see where I've come from. Because if you ever think of doing something like this, or getting into a business where you're shooting video or stills, but you don't think you're good enough, and you might not be. Most of us, when we start out, we're not good enough. Take a look at my first few videos, see how bad I was, then jump ahead a month at a time, and you can see the improvements, and you have the same opportunity as an ordinary filmmaker, as an ordinary photographer. You have that capability to grow, and you can do it. You just have to believe in yourself. But whenever you hit some roadblocks or do some really stupid things like I did this morning, and I'm one of those people that believes, yes, you do stupid things. We all do. We're not computers. We're not infallible. We make mistakes, and it's how you learn from that and go on. So yeah, I've always kept mic bias the way it is, never fiddle around with it because of the mic, or the mics that I use. But now I know, and I'll never forget this again. If I accidentally go into mic bias, double check to make sure I didn't accidentally toggle it. But that's it for now, guys. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon.